tolerant society of different kinds of people and organizations within it.
I was certainly anti-war. I can't say that I was a leader, but I went to important demonstrations against the war. And afterwards, after I came to Vietnam in 1988, I worked for a time with something called Indochina Project in Washington, D.C. And the purpose of that organization was to try to restore relationships with
Some of them felt differently about the experience, but to some, the experience was extremely overwhelming. Let's take a look at their stories in Hanoi through the following report.
This is the moment Richard David Nagin, a retired journalist and member of Communist Party USA, has been waiting for so long. He is in Ba Dinh Square, visiting President Ho Chi Minh's mausoleum and this humble steel house where he spent his last years.
It's very moving to see him, to see this beautiful sight. And he lived a simple life, but he was totally focused on the one thing of winning the national independence and sovereignty for the Vietnamese people. And as an inspiration for the whole world.
Richard David Nagin is one among the 15 foreign anti-war activists who visited Vietnam on the 40th anniversary of the end of the American War. For many within this delegation, it is the first time they have visited Vietnam. On their visit, they learned a lot about President Ho Chi Minh.
I just couldn't believe how I felt when I saw Ho Chi Minh, It was quite moving. As we left and went out, the woman next to me burst into tears, and we kind of hugged and we felt that.
It's moving for us here today to see the reverence in which he is held. And actually the most exciting thing was to see so many young school children so that they learn their own history and they know what an important role he played for the future of Vietnam.
During the Vietnam War, these anti-war activists played an active role in the anti-war movement which took place throughout the United States.
And we put out a newspaper that rallied the people and explained to the people why this war was wrong and who was responsible. We organized demonstrations and marches in the cities. I was living in New York. We marched in the streets and we chanted, "Ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh, the NLF is going to win." And now they won.
Before leaving, all members of the delegation wished to have a photo at the Ba Dinh Square. They said that they would like to bring back home a memory of their visit to the place where President Ho Chi Minh read the Declaration of Independence of Vietnam on September 2nd, 1945.
So tell us a little bit about Rick, about your Hanoi experience. You visited the Ho Chi Minh Presidential Palace.
Yes,
and you got really emotional.
I was, yes. I try not to get too emotional now, but we went to the mausoleum and we saw Ho Chi Minh, but also we went to the museum and re-examined his life, his whole long history from 1919 until his death in 1969, when he fought endlessly, relentlessly, persistently for the independence and sovereignty of Vietnam. And his life, of course, is an inspiration for all people that, who want to struggle for justice and peace and democracy. So just to see that was very emotional for me. One thing that always inspired me about Ho Chi Minh was that he was a wonderful poet. And there's one poem that he wrote that I've always kept. I forget, I don't know. I have it with me, actually.
You have the poem with you.
Yes.
Let's read it.
I don't know how to say it in Vietnamese, but it says, "Neither high nor very far, neither emperor nor king, you are only a little milestone which stands on the edge of the highway. The people passing by, you point to people passing by, you point the right direction and stop them from getting lost. You tell them of the distance for which they must journey. Your service is not a small one, and people will always remember you."
Mm-hmm. And why do you keep the poem with you?
Because I think that it shows the character of Ho Chi Minh, and it's the communist character. I think, to me, it's the ideal of what I try to strive to be also. It shows the modesty of the movement, and yet the determination to succeed in the end. Yes.
For Richard, this may be the first time that he's visited Vietnam. But for John and Janet, after the war ended, they visited many, many times to try to bridge the relationships between the two countries, as well as the relationships between the two nations' people. Let's take a look at their bridging efforts in the next report.
John took these photos on April the 30th, 1975 in Hanoi, when the entire capital city was rejoicing in victory. John will never forget these historic moments.
On April 30th, 1975, with 4 other people, anti-war people, just by pure coincidence, we arrived in Hanoi. So I was here and had the immensely moving experience of being with people from Hanoi, walking around the One Kiem Lake and celebrating.
The efforts by John and his fellow anti-war activists were paid off, but John believed that those efforts needed to continue. In 1985, he launched the U.S. Indochina Reconciliation Project, which later became the Fund for Reconciliation and Development. Throughout the past 30 years, the organization has held tens of trips and seminars in both the U.S. and Indochina countries, including Vietnam. Their aim is to break down barriers and distrust, to build confidence and friendships between the people who were separated by war. John cannot count how many times he has been to Vietnam over the past 4 decades. It's the same with Janet Gardner. Since 1987, she has traveled to Vietnam many times to make films about the lives of war survivors.
Called it the last ghost of war.
My heart went out to the victims, and I thought anything I could do to help them, would not be a waste of time. I haven't really thought about trying to influence U.S.-Vietnamese relations. I don't know that I have that kind of power, really. If I can make good films and make people happy and help people come together and understand better each other, then I'll be happy.
John and Janet are 2 among many people who have bridged the distance between the 2 countries who used to be on opposite sides of the war. Whether in wartime or peacetime, they have stood by Vietnam in its fight for peace and a better future for everyone.
Thank you.
So you're also one of the active players in rebuilding relationships between the U.S. and Vietnam. When did you first start, and how did the journey of coming back to Vietnam and helping U.S.-Vietnam relations begin?
was one that I found.
Country have done during the war here. It reconfirms my gut reaction that war is not the way to solve our problems. It has only created problems, and it has created immense generational problems, and we have no right to do that to another people.
Agent Orange dioxin was sprayed by the U.S. Army in Thừa Thiên Huế province during the war. The province is home to over 4,300 Agent Orange dioxin victims. Among them are 450 third-generation victims.
Now Rick, talking about Agent Orange, since we're on the topic, what were some of your impressions of Agent Orange before you came to Vietnam?
Well, I didn't really know too much about it, and I really appreciate the opportunity that John and his organization has provided so that we could actually see firsthand the legacy in terms of the human legacy. And we were able to visit with some families where we saw very humble people who were, living in their humble homes, who welcomed us. And what was really striking to me was their optimism and their good spirits, and that they, despite their tremendous disability, that they were, what I see here in Vietnam is that it's a caring society, and that even the people that were the most victimized, people are uniting behind them and supporting them and trying to make it possible for them to do the best they can. And that's very inspiring to see that. We have a big struggle in the United States about getting the right benefits for the American veterans, because many of them, as we mentioned earlier, are not treated well. They're neglected. Some of them are homeless and have mental problems and stuff like that, and they're just ignored, despite the fact that they, made these sacrifices on behalf of the government of the United States.
Now, Janet, in 19...
Strong spirit and Project Renew gave him more energy to feed himself and his family.
To me, the whole war was so unnecessary and so wasteful, and the fact that lives are still 40 years later being disrupted, but at the same time, some of the people, their will to live, their will to produce, is overcoming that, and that's a tremendously inspiring thing, that people are saying, no, I'm not going to be just a victim, I'm going to take over what's happened to me and still be productive, still make, do things for myself, my family, and my country.
Dang is among over 8,500 victims of landmine accident in Guangxi province after the war ended.
The bomb may have taken his legs and one arm.
Guangxi province also has the highest rate of
determination and persistence, and never give up, never say die. And I think your determination to live in peace with your neighbors, I think that's very important. So that's a very important message, I think, that you project to the whole world.
Right. That's great. Thank you for those compliments. What about you, John?
Well, I'll turn it around a little bit and say, I mean, part of what Vietnam means to me are Vietnamese I know, have known for most of my adult life now. Friends and colleagues and the children of those friends and colleagues. And but it also, Vietnam is when the U.S. begins to come to terms with itself. It's when it begins to recognize that history is important and that other people's views of themselves are important. It's when it begins to recognize that weapons have consequences, and even if you think you're doing something for the right reasons, the position you put your soldiers in leads them to do things that are terrible and not what you would ever have wanted them to do. These, I say the beginning because we then can quickly forget these things. We totally forgot them in terms of Iraq. And mostly forgot them in terms of Afghanistan. You know, the challenge for us, I mean, we're all of what's called the Vietnam generation, and we're retirement and beyond. I mean, we lose our friends, people who were tremendously important in the anti-war movement have now passed away. So our generation is moving away from this picture. We hope that our kids have learned something from us, either directly or indirectly, and are able to understand the wrongness of the war, the injustice of the war.
Janet, what about you? What does Vietnam entail for you?
Well, when we first landed here in 1987, first I was a little bit scared because I thought, because of all the people must really hate us because of all that had gone on. But that wasn't the case. And maybe because some of the work that John had done with the Vietnam American Friendship Society, we were given a very warm welcome wherever we went, and it seemed that people could understand the difference between the American people and the American government, and they seemed to realize that we didn't really want that war. It wasn't the war that we wanted, and I mean, it's been an ongoing experience, you know, a developing experience, and it was interesting to come back and see kind of a new Vietnam in a way.
Thank you all so much for being on the show today, and thank you, for in the past for being the heroes of peace and being the heroes of anti-war movements, even though you probably did not know the faces of the people that you were supporting, or the face of the country that you were supporting. And thank you for still continuing to do that now, that you know the faces of those people and you know the face of Vietnam, and continuing to bring peace forth. So thank you all for doing that.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, and I wish you all very, very good health so that you can continue to come back next time, and we'll get to talk more and more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's it for this edition of Talk Vietnam. Thank you for tuning in with us, and we hope to see you next time. We'll talk again. Goodbye.